The 2025 International Colloquium Series Europe is sponsored by Union Theological Seminary in the City of New York, the Episcopal Diocese of California, King's College London, Regent's Park College, University of Oxford, the Center for Black Theology at Regent's Park College, Oxford, the Protestant Theological Institute of Paris, and in partnership with the Cathedral Church of the Holy Trinity, the American Cathedral in Paris.
The Northern California Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Community Foundation is dedicated to promoting justice, health, education, and service. Please consider making a donation at NorcalMLKFoundation.org. Every donation makes a difference.
We'll get Burnett to play us out when we close shortly. What I'd like to do now is to invite our friends, perhaps in reverse order, so you first, Aaron, just to come and briefly say something about what has been a key aspect of your journey. So if someone were to say to any of you, okay, so what's a key moment, either the moment or a moment, where you suddenly found yourself in terms of being the scholar who you are? What was that moment? I shared a little bit this morning that there was something about the way in which Cohn kind of gently, or not so gently, kind of humiliated me. Although in fact I brought it upon myself by just saying something really dumb and stupid in front of him. That was a key moment that concentrated in my mind. For the moment he told me that, I never wanted to be a comedy script writer again. That just disappeared. I wanted to be a black theologian, so that the next time I met him, I could look him in the eye and say, you know, Professor Cohn, I'm doing the work and I want you to feel proud of me. Which I'm pleased to say he did say that on several occasions. So that was a key moment for me. And not that I knew it at the time, but as Paul Tillich says, life is lived forward but understood backwards. So, Brother Evan, key moment.
Key moment. Key moment.
Key moment.
Key moment. Key moment. Key moment. Key moment. Two key moments, 2008. So at the time, I had spent 10 years, or two very short years. 2008, I had spent 10 years on the executive committee of the predecessor to the Martin Luther King Foundation. And there was a wonderful minister by the name of Cecil Williams, San Francisco's Glide Memorial Church. Glide Church was known throughout the United States and in many parts of the world as being really the first Christian congregation that was open and affirming, welcoming. What he did in the church is he took the cross off of the dais, much like this, took it off and told people that you be the cross. You go out into the world and you be the cross. Coretta Scott King in 1985 had come to Cecil and asked Cecil to help her organize the national holiday in honor of her husband. Came into being in January of 1986. That's where the foundation comes from. So Cecil in 2008, Cecil came to me and said, look, Aaron, said, I want to give this thing up. I've got other things I'm doing. I'm retiring from the pulpit, and I want to do other things, and I'm ready to retire. And this is my last year of this organization. I said, but you can't. I said, wait. You can't retire because there is a person by the name of Barack Obama who is going to be the president of the United States. This was back in February and March of 2008. He's going to be the president. You can't retire. Come November, he won. 2009, he took office. So he said, okay, Aaron, I'm going to do it one more time. In 2009, wonderful celebration, thousands of people. The next year, after Obama's first year, he came to me and said, Aaron, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. I said, I'm done. He said, when I say I'm done, I'm done. I'm not coming back. But I want you to take the helm and reconstitute this celebration, this organization, and take it forward. For 3 years, there had been something percolating inside that said, this is something that I would, you get that knowing that this is something that I need to do. But it wasn't something that you can't force this. It's got to come some sort of way, but you can't force that. You do. It becomes all discombobulated, and you become thinking too much about yourself instead of thinking about what you are supposed to be doing. And there was that knowing inside. So when Cecil said that was confirmation. So that was one thing. So, I was thinking that 2 hours a month, help the organization go 2 hours a month. That's good. I can be doing other stuff. But, in this type of work, 2 hours a month became 2 hours a week. Then 2 hours a week became 5 hours a week. Then 5 hours a week became 5 hours a day, and it becomes a life work. So for the last 15 years, that's what I've been doing. So that's one thing. The second, Dwight may have been here first. So the second had to do with a challenge. So my lovely wife, Colette, said to me in 2014, said, Aaron, why don't you just go back to school? You're always talking about this stuff. I said, okay. I said, you threatening? Now you say, you daring me to go back to school? I said, because I can go back to school. Anyway, went back, knew James Noel for a long time, had already met Dwight and Alan Bosak. We had invited them to do an event in San Francisco at our Museum of the African Diaspora. Wonderful event. So anyway, went back, and James Noel, God bless him, James Noel introduced me to Charles Houston Long. And he asked me to go to Atlanta to the American Academy of Religion Conference in Atlanta, Georgia that year, and deliver a speech in Dr. Long's honor. So I delivered the speech, met Long, we sat, Ray was there, we sat and commiserated and had just a good old time. Came back and he gave me Long's book, Significations. When he gave me Long's book, Significations, I was hooked. I knew, I said, this is what I want to do with this part of my life. Those are the two instances of knowing. Now, so Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier, both gone, were best friends. So Harry Belafonte, when a question about Sidney Poitier would come up to him during talks and stuff like that, he would light up. One thing Harry Belafonte says that, look, there's something about Sidney and me that's very different. Sidney was an actor, and that's all he could do. So when there were vagrancies in the acting world, he had to act a certain way, or he wasn't going to get any gigs. He said, but me, I had another gig, man. So I could sing. Mm-hmm. So if Hollywood wasn't working out, I'd go out and do concerts. I was doing well. Mm-hmm. But Sydney couldn't do anything like that. For me, the move toward scholarship in religion and in the history of religions was not something about getting a gig. It was like Club Med for me. It was like respite for me to wrestle with, because I already had a gig. Dwight knew, I mean, you know, Andrea knew, Anthony and Reddie. I already had a gig, but I wanted to experience something that came from within, but came from within in a primordial sense, to discover not only who I was, but to be able to articulate it in a way that could be shared with others. And those two things are what drove me. Thank you.
I'll try to say these two experiences really fast, and not that you told me to do two. You said a key moment, but they're kind of connected, and it has led me to where I'm at today. And it's tied to my grandparents, my grandpa and my grandmother, who raised me after my mother died. I had a conversion experience while I was in the military. And I'll never forget when I went home, at one point, I was, because I immediately started studying theology and all this kind of stuff. And I went home and I was attacking my grandfather about about the Bible and that kind of stuff. And he said something to me. My nickname, again, don't tell anybody this stuff. I'm telling everybody as I tell you to tell everybody. My nickname at home is Joey. That's what my family called me. And everybody calls me Joey. And so I was getting on my grandpa with all this new knowledge that I had. He said, Joey, you done got mean since you became a Christian, boy. That was a key moment.
Yeah.
A second key moment was my grandmother was dying with cancer. Again, this is tied to the kind of Christian faith that I'm imbibing, you see, because it's too narrow. That's the point. But the second time, my grandmother is dying from cancer, and so I didn't know how to encourage her because she didn't have the right view of faith in my view. So I said, something wrong with this Christianity. That was a key moment. Right? And why is that? Because I grew up in a family where there's this wonderful sense of play. And I'll close on that. And so what that did was, those two experiences in a sense drove me back to this idea that biblical faith is not about being religious. It's about being radically human. And being radically human includes God and the religious things you do properly situated. Now, when I say radically human, I'm using the word in terms of radix, which means to get at the root of what it means to be human. See? That's what faith does for you. It makes you more radically human. And part of what the beauty of being human, and I think, coming from my family, is this sense of play. And I'll show you really quickly this little quote from bell hooks, but to help you to understand what I mean by play. A type of play that informs your work. And that's where Monk comes in at. There's this wonderful ludic quality in Monk's music. It means like spontaneity, a joyful, playful quality. And this is from bell hooks. It reads like this. What has also handicapped us historically is that elements of play have not been part of the white supremacist Eurocentric mode of discourse within the academy. So to some extent, social mobility required us to enter into a social contract where we suppress both the capacity and the desire to engage in cultural rituals of play. Signifying, she says, is a skill, a method of disengagement which allows you to unwind. I think of it as breakdancing, an art where you see the body deconstructing itself, so to speak, showing you how you can move and control parts of your body you didn't realize existed within the realm of self-discipline or control. In other words, again, capital P play. I missed that with my grandparents when I was a kid and having that sense of joyful union and living life in that way. And I think there's a way in which that can inform our faith, and I want to encourage you to look for banisters and ways that you now fulfill your life before God in play. Thank you.
Amen. Amen. The genre of
not sticking to the rules of one example, I'll also give 2 examples as well. I think the first one I already gave was when I met James Cone for the first time. We talked for 4 or 5 hours. And again, for me, it just showed me that a strong individual spiritual basis, biblically based person can also be linked to a community that's involved in struggle for justice in community and linked to the church. And there was a whole generation of us who left the church, and Cone brought us back. James Evans talks about it. There was a testimony one time at the AR, or SSBR, or SCBC, and people were saying where they were when they heard that voice. Everybody's saying, this is the voice of Cone that goes in his writings. So I was one of the tail end that was brought back to the formal church. So, and I could see a resolution of a lot of the internal dilemmas and questions I had as a young person. You know, social justice, spiritual fulfillment, institutional organization in the community, and the church itself. That was one. And the second one occurred in 2015. And just the backdrop. So after college, I was going to go to Ivy Business School. And so I decided to take that year off, and I drove to Harlem with my friend, which turned into 5, which led me up the hill to Union Seminary. And the idea was to become a billionaire, an investment banker on Wall Street, a billionaire, and give the money away to people in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the ghetto. That was really the whole point. If I had made the billion, we might be meeting on my yacht in Kauai, but that's all right. We're meeting here in the Baptist church, amen? So in 2015, I met some young people of color, but also other folks too, some international folks, who raised this issue of venture capital. And basically it's a way for people who are outside of the institutional context for accumulating capital to get into that venture capital. And I can talk about that all night if you want. And they were also people of color and people who didn't have access. And they were young people, and they were people, some were of faith, others were in this broader thing called spirituality. So in a sense, I've been writing but poor and working class Black folk, and all interracial, all across, which is a big debate Cone and I used to have. But I've always been that way. You know, my starting point has always been in Black liberation theology. How can we accumulate resources so poor and working class people can have a life and have it abundantly? His starting point was, how is it possible that white people can oppress Black people and still call themselves Christian? That'll take you, but so I always included white working class people in my thinking and connections. And so that second event was 2015, where I met all these people, and I got introduced to this notion of venture capital and spirituality and social justice, and began to see models, because I have to see concrete models of the theology and theory I'm doing. And that hooked me back to my intention of how to use capital for poor and people, working class people in the United States, and also the third world, from a Christian perspective. And so I've been working on that since 2015.
Okay, so, wow, this is so fun. I could tell you a story about James Noel. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to save that for when Anthony invites me back. I could tell you a story about writing a dissertation on 2 dead white guys, one French, one Swiss, German, and dropping a footnote in the dissertation about Katie Cannon. That footnote actually, my advisor said, take that footnote and put it into the body of the text. That footnote became my job talk for my first job at Emory University. There's a whole story I can tell about that. I won't tell you about that, but I do what I do because of a footnote. But I will tell you, the story I want to share is actually not my story. It's a story of a classmate at Yale Divinity School who asked Sean Copeland in 1993, when she was at Yale Divinity School, if she would supervise a thesis on Bob Marley. And she said yes, without hesitation. And I remember this story because it has taught me to have a most capacious understanding of what theology does. So it's not my story, and yet it is my story. Yeah, so that's all I have to say.
All right. Wow.
Hopefully the next time you come, we will start with the stories, because I just think there's just so many things that we could say, that all of us have those moments that have been transformative. Another very quick story for me to share is that when I saw an advert for the director of the Oxford Centre for Religion and Culture, this was June 2019. I remember thinking I must apply, if only to try and force the college in Oxford to at least realise that black people exist. And so I applied, and as I often shared with other people, there is a certain freedom in applying for a job you think you have no chance of getting. Because it just means that, like, just canny yourself. Anyway, so I kind of applied and was shortlisted, which itself was a minor miracle, because jobs in Oxford are very hard to get, and they're very hard to get if you're not Oxford yourself. So I've never studied here. I have no history here prior to actually applying for the job. So I applied for the job and I was shortlisted. Although over 50 odd people applied, but they shortlisted 6 people. I was the only black person shortlisted, and the only person who was not Oxford. And of the 6 people who were shortlisted, 3 were already in the college. So there were 3 insiders already. And so I came, so I was shortlisted, I came to the interview, and I figured, well, there's no point trying to pretend that I'm Oxford or Oxbridge, and there's no point trying to be someone I'm not. So I was just myself. And the interview went well, but then as I came out and then spoke to the then secretary at the time, she said, well, she says, I think you've done well to get shortlisted, because we have 3 professors who have been shortlisted, and we have a number of people who are Oxford insiders who are already in the college, but like, you've done well. I'm told that one of the things that helped get me appointed, and Dwight doesn't know this, is that Dwight was one of my referees. And so when I was appointed, when I got the phone call 3 days later, so it took them 3 days to argue over who they should appoint. So although it was unanimous eventually, I'm told it was a bit like a theological version of 12 Angry Men. So it started off with someone else being chosen, and then they argued it over 3 days, and eventually 2 particular people on the committee kind of won everyone else down, and they eventually gave me the job. But when I spoke to the chair of the committee, he said, Anthony said, like, there's clearly someone who loves you. And I said, well, obviously that's my mother and my dad, obviously my family. He says, yeah, but there's this other guy called Professor Dwight Hopkins, because he wrote you the mother of all recommendations.
It was the mother of all recommendations.
It was the mother of all recommendations. And he said, you know something? He said, everyone needs someone like that who's going to write you a reference like that. Yeah. When we got that reference, we thought to ourselves, how can we not choose this guy? So Dwight, actually that mother of all references got me a job against all the odds, because even the other day we made 2 new appointments in the faculty, and both of them are Oxford insiders. Both of them did their doctorates here, they went away, they've come back. To get a job and not be Oxbridge is a hell of a thing.
Oh wow.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
So we come to the conclusion. I'd like to invite Burnett to come back and do some more playing for us, to play us out. And as we go to the piano, anything you want to play, my brother? Just said, I hope that this will be the first of a number of collaborations between ourselves. But one of the important things about being part of a broader community, what Jamaican was called having backative. So having backative means that you have people who have your back. That means that the people who don't like you can't dare mess with you, because if they mess with you, there's a whole set of people who are going to come looking for them. And so one of the things about having backative for me, having friends in the US and South African parts of the world, is that it gives solidarity to the work we're doing here in Oxford. Oxford has many gifts and graces, but inclusivity and radicalism isn't one of them. And so the hope is that through these ongoing partnerships, we will begin to challenge some of the existing systems and structures here, and hopefully, if nothing else, to remind people that the God that is often the centre of a lot of our work, although our department is very broad and we study religions, we have Islam and Judaism and African religions and Hinduism. Overwhelmingly, it's still a Christian department. And most of the people who teach in it are ordained in some way or other. But the truth is that God that's been at the centre of most of the work was not a God of liberation, but was a God of control and oppression. And so our work, I say our work, it's not just my work, I'm honoured to be the professor here, but I stand on the shoulders of giants, is in order to tell another story.
The International Colloquium Series, confronting global issues with moral clarity and intellectual depth.